Last week, the High Court found that Matt Hancock had acted illegally in not publishing contracts signed for PPE during the COVID pandemic. Now, by this week, it's clear that despite calls for his resignation, Matt Hancock isn't going anywhere. But even if he won't quit, perhaps at least he could apologise. It's not much to ask, but he doesn't seem willing to. This was put to the Health Secretary by Piers on Tuesday.
Apologised for unlawful conduct, which seems an extraordinary position for a cabinet minister to take. Why haven't you?
Well, no, I won't apologise, because to apologise would imply that I do something differently. And given the choices that we were faced with in April and May, when there were very, very serious problems with access to PPE, and some people were going without, and the team were working so hard, to have taken some of the team off those life-saving work in order to complete the paperwork on time instead of just over a fortnight late, that would have been wrong. I understand
that, but you were found guilty of unlawful conduct. And it seems to me a strange situation where a cabinet minister representing a government is found guilty of unlawful conduct, but sees there's nothing to apologise for. I mean, surely, if you've broken the law, you should just say, look, I'm sorry I broke the law, but you seem determined not to do that.
Well, the reason is because if I were given my time again, and if I was given the choice between doing work that saved lives or filing the paperwork at exactly the right date, I would have done the same, and so would you, Piers.
Now, he's putting forward a good argument. I mean, his sort of public relations people are going to be very happy with Matt Hancock there for fielding questions like that. There's a lot what he said that's completely dishonest, though. So he says, it was just reported over a fortnight later. And the impression you get from that is that all contracts were reported around a fortnight later because everyone was just a little bit overworked trying to save lives. Now, the reason that doesn't work is because it wasn't the case that all contracts were, reported about 2 weeks later. It was the controversial contracts which were reported a long time after they were signed. And that's because the government didn't want people talking about them for various reasons, often because they knew the person who got the million or the million odd pounds, however much it was. The fact that the controversial ones were reported much, much later than a fortnight, like he said in that interview, and was reported by Mikey Smith at The Mirror. This was an article this morning. He writes that when it comes to the more controversial contracts, the actual average time was 78 days. So that's 3 times the 30-day limit. So it does seem that as more details emerge, even if the argument might sound reasonable at first glance, he's not being particularly honest with the public again. And this reality, which I'm sure is understood by most people in government, seems to be being reflected in how Gavin Williamson responded to the same line of questioning, in fact, from Piers this morning.
And no one ever no one has ever any intention of breaking the law.
He literally said yesterday he would do it all over again. Should he do it all over again?
Matt is focused in terms of delivering the amazing vaccine programme we've seen transform our outlook.
But would you be happy if he acts unlawfully again?
No government minister aims to act unlawfully. It's part of a ministerial code.
He literally said he would do it all over again.
That's
what I call aiming, isn't it?
No minister would ever aim to act unlawfully.
He literally said yesterday, I would do the same again. That's what I call aiming.
I'm afraid I didn't have the privilege of listening to him yesterday, but I'll certainly take it up with him, because obviously any minister will always be in a position where they aim to always act in a lawful manner.
But just to cut to the quick, you're sorry.
We always regret the fact that if we're not in the situation where the decisions we've taken have been upheld by a judge, that's certainly something we'd never aim to do.
So you're sorry?
Deeply regret it, yes.
Thank you, Education Secretary. Finally, a member of the government regrets the fact the government broke the law. Thank you. It took us about 6 minutes.
Celebrates with a cup of tea.
Next time, if you want to spend more time talking about your brief, just say that at the start. It saves so much pain.
That was Gavin Williamson. He's willing to apologise for the government having broken the law. Now, Williamson is, of course, considered by pretty much everyone to be the most useless politician in Britain. But Aaron, has he got it right on this particular question?
I just think we've been through such a traumatic 12 months. I just don't think people care if they get vaccinated before June, end of June. I just don't think people are going to care as a political question. As a question of probity in public life, clearly it's a huge one. I'm not trying to minimize it. But if we're trying to read the political runes here and a potential electoral fallout, I think by the end of this year, Gavin Williamson, there'll be a reshuffle and he probably won't be going up in the world. I think he'll probably be gotten rid of. Although that said, he apparently does have a lot of goss and a lot of people. But again, for me and you, Michael, I'm old enough to know that nothing serious will happen to Conservatives on matters of public probity. I know that, and for me, the strange thing is that that's just become so normal. It's become really normal. We talk about the Labour Party failing to really hold the Tories to account, or the media. But look, this was happening on GMB. And Keir Starmer's talked about this. I just think it's become, particularly in the context of COVID, I think COVID stories are ubiquitous. They become a background noise. And I think it's really hard for most people, beyond a very, informed minority, to sort of stay abreast of everything. All they know is whether or not they've got their job, whether or not they've got, a vaccination coming, whether or not they've lost somebody. Those are the factors that kind of shape somebody's view of whether or not the political class has done a good job on this. But I mean, clearly he should resign, yes.
Well, the case, I suppose, is an apologise and resign. I mean, I think that Labour shouldn't have asked for him to resign, because I think people would think that's a bit, petty in the middle of a pandemic. And also, we're in the middle of a vaccine rollout, which is going quite well. I don't think it would play well. But being in opposition is partly sort of building up a case against the government. And that's where I think they have really failed, because the reason Matt Hancock is so confident saying, I did the right thing and I'd do it again, is because no one has properly challenged him to say, no, look, this wasn't just 2 weeks late on average. This was you systematically not releasing data, not releasing contracts, which you thought would be politically awkward. And that's why you delayed them. You didn't delay them because you were busy. You delayed them because you didn't want people to know about them while it was still fresh in people's mind. We all know that controversies get less controversial the more time goes on. And that's why they were stalling. And that's an argument that Keir Starmer and Labour haven't effectively made, which is why journalists aren't putting it to them, because we all know that, especially at the BBC, they take their lead from the arguments that the opposition parties are making. Because that hasn't been put on the table, Matt Hancock is getting away very lightly with this, even if I think it was never going to be the case that he'd resign over this.
But I mean, under normal conditions, so two things. Firstly, I think it's actually possible the magnitude of this means that this will re-emerge after the summer, and actually it's part of Matt Hancock's kind of political persona, and it may tarnish his political brand, right? Like you say, the further away you get, the less important it is. I think because people now are so buoyant at the news of potentially us exiting lockdown, might not happen, might be another screw up, might be lockdown 4 or 5. I think it may be revisited after the summer, or maybe next year, or before the end of this year. These are really unique circumstances. Under normal conditions, I would say Labour should just be saying the Tories are so corrupt. Keep on saying it, almost like Trump-esque, drain the swamp. There's so much of it. I just think in the context of the pandemic, maybe they should still do it. But the point is that would only really reap a dividend, I think, after this is done with. I think they've put themselves in a really tough place, because Keir Starmer's leadership is defined by nothing else if not being different to his predecessor. And that's exactly what John McDonnell and Jeremy Corbyn would have done. And so he's in a bit of a tight spot,
I think they should keep hammering it home while saying that actually the most important thing is saving lives. I mean, you can do both if you're a bit more creative in your answers, which Keir Starmer isn't really. I want to move on to one more clip from Matt Hancock, because actually in his whole defence of this whole situation, the thing that is probably most outrageous is how integral to his defence of not reporting in good time that these contracts were signed, often with people who were very close to Tory ministers, was that by doing this, he managed to avoid any national shortages of PPE. This is what he told Andrew Marr on Sunday. He got away with it with Andrew Marr, but surprise, surprise, he didn't get away with it when speaking to Piers Morgan.
One of your justifications was that you had avoided any national shortage of PPE.
Yeah.
Well, that's just a barefaced lie, isn't it? We were chronically short of PPE. We hadn't prepared properly for this pandemic, and we got caught without enough PPE. We all know that. Why are you pretending that actually back in that first wave we had enough PPE?
I'm not at all. As I said just now, there were areas where it was enormously challenging, and there were areas where there were problems, but we never had a national outage of it. We were very close to that, but we didn't have a national outage of
What do you mean by national outage? Because we had literally NHS staff having to use bin liners because they were seeing colleagues dying. I mean, look at this picture. I mean, that's what the reality was. I would honestly have more respect if you just said two things about all this, because I watched it on Andrew Mudd. I couldn't believe what I was watching. If you just said, look, we did break the law, and I'm sorry for that, here's my reason, but that your excuse wasn't that you avoided a shortage of PPE, because you didn't avoid a shortage of PPE, which is why nearly 800 health workers have died.
No, so we never had a national outage of it because of my team and the work that they were doing. And yes, as I just said a couple of minutes ago, yes, there were problems in individual areas, and your photos are testament to that.
Again, there are just lots of lies there. So you can see on Mar, he said there were no national shortages. Now he sort of changed the language to be there were no national outages, although when pushed he sort of says yes, there weren't national shortages, they were only local. So what he's suggesting is we always had enough PPE, it just wasn't distributed properly. Now, or the problems were only local. Now that doesn't stack up. I mean, it obviously doesn't stack up on just a normal semantic level. If you're saying there were no shortages and then you've got people wearing bin bags instead of gowns, then it doesn't really make sense on an intuitive level. But also on a factual level, even if you are going to be really nitpicky about the difference between local and national shortages, there was a national shortage. So this is from the national guidelines on the government's websites in April 2020. This isn't a local website, this is the government website. So it says, and this was published in terms of NHS guidelines, this document aims to highlight the sessional use and reuse of PPE when there are severe shortages of supplies. This is the introduction to that document. The considerations are to ensure that health and care workers are appropriately protected from COVID-19, where items of PPE are unavailable and should be considered as temporary measures until the global supply chain is adequate to meet the UK's needs. The reuse of PPE should be implemented until confirmation of adequate resupply is in place. So they're saying that the supply cannot meet the UK's needs. Right? That's a national shortage. Now, those guidelines included the suggestion that many items of PPE, including face masks and gowns, should be used more than once. Now, they were not local guidelines, they were national guidelines. Now, the reason we have that screenshot is because it was taken at the time by Lewis Goodall of the BBC and was tweeted out again after that interview from Matt Hancock. The reason we needed to get it from that BBC journalist is because the page has now gone. So if you click on the link to where that page was, it now says withdrawn considerations for acute personal protective equipment shortages. There's no longer on the website that people had to reuse masks and gowns. They've sort of removed that from history, just like Matt Hancock would like to do in those interviews. You can see there it also says the Public Health England Acute Shortages Guidance was introduced on 17th of April as a result of an acute shortage of PPE. Given our improved supply, this guidance has now been withdrawn. So you've got there, these are all public documents saying there was a shortage of PPE. Now that's not a local shortage. They're not saying this is a shortage across the NHS of PPE, which means some people are going to have to use single-use PPE more than once. It's on record, and Matt Hancock is still going on television, not only saying, it was an average of 2 weeks, when actually it was 3 months when it came to the controversial ones, but he's also saying we avoided any national shortage of PPE when his own website says the opposite. Aaron, I do think he is getting away with this, though. And again, I don't think this is about a resignation thing. I think he's getting away without his reputation even damaged because no one's really pointing out these things.
Well, Piers Morgan's doing it on GMB. I mean, it's one of those moments where you say, "Oh, the media aren't calling it out," and we all do that, right? And sometimes you'll tweet something like a segment from a news show or a screen grab from a newspaper and say, "The media aren't calling this out." Well, here you go.
It's less the media; it's more the opposition, because it's with Piers Morgan. He calls out everyone. He's good at his job, but the BBC. And like the BBC especially will only bring it up if Labour make it an issue. If Labour don't make it an issue, it's not going to appear on the BBC. That's how they sort of read impartiality.
Yes, no, I don't think the BBC would go big on this, because I think when it comes to issues of personal probity and potential sort of lies or corruption. I don't think they generally don't attack the party of government. Like you say, if there's the opportunity to do so, if the opposition do that, we might see an expose, like a panorama or a Radio 4 investigation in like a month. But in terms of the 5, 6 o'clock news, they don't really go for that stuff. I mean, I might be wrong, and I'd be interested in sort of your thoughts on this. Maybe Newsnight sometimes might go a bit sort of rougher there.
Well,
but in terms
they
of,
go on it
if
it's because they have to report on what the Labour Party are doing. So if the Labour Party are only talking about this, then it's going to get on the 6 o'clock news.
You think it's a bigger story than that, though? I know what you mean, but you would think it's a bigger story than that. I mean, forget Matt Hancock, forget his personal role, forget the sort of meme of Tory corruption throughout the rest of this. I think the extent to which the brazenness of him lying, I don't think it's going to have necessarily cut through for the public at large. But I think for most journalists, think this is an interesting story.
Why does he keep lying?
Why does he keep lying?